Miyamoto Musashi is remembered as one of the greatest swordsmen Japan has ever produced. He lived through one of the most violent eras in Japanese history, surviving more than 60 deadly duels. But what sets him apart is that he didn't come from an elite dojo or rely on formal training under renowned masters. Instead, he spent much of his life as a wandering Ronin, a masterless samurai drifting from place to place, often living in the wild and refining his skill through observation, constant practice, and real combat experience. He proved that excellence has very little to do with what you're given and everything to do with what you're willing to endure. Later in life, he decided to put his ideas into writing with The Book of Five Rings, using lessons from sword fighting to explain strategy, decision-making, and self-improvement. Just a few days before his death, he wrote the Dokkodo, a short list of 21 principles that reflected the way he believed a person should live. Together, these works offer practical lessons for anyone trying to learn skills and improve themselves. They suggest that you don't need perfect conditions, special advantages, or anyone else's approval to make progress. And that's what this video is about: how to master any skill through the philosophy of Miyamoto Musashi. Number 1. The world is your sensei. Musashi's first exposure to martial arts came from his father, Shinmen Munisai, a highly skilled swordsman and fighter. But the relationship between them was far from ideal. Historical accounts describe Munisai as a harsh and demanding man, and the training Musashi received was shaped as much by his discipline as it was by intimidation. As he entered his teenage years, tensions between his father and his son grew. Musashi was strong, stubborn, and unwilling to be controlled. Whatever bond existed between them eventually broke down. Then, at just 13 years old, Musashi fought his first recorded duel. His opponent was Arima Kihei, a travelling samurai who'd publicly challenged local fighters. Musashi accepted. Using a wooden staff, he defeated and killed the older, more experienced man. The duel changed the course of his entire life. Not long after that, Musashi left his village and began living on his own. From that point on, he was a Ronin. He had no prestigious school to train him, no powerful family supporting him, and no established system to guide his development. So if he wanted to survive the violent landscape of 17th century Japan, he had to figure out the mechanics of combat on his own. Without a master, Musashi looked outward. He began to realize that the fundamental laws of strategy were woven into the daily labor of ordinary people. He spent time observing carpenters as they built houses. From watching them, he learned how angles are measured, how tasks are sequenced, and how every structure depends on the strength of its foundation. He'd sit by rivers for long periods, studying the flow of water as it effortlessly adapted to the shape of rocks and vessels. From this, he understood that the human mind must do the same under pressure, adapt without breaking. He also paid close attention to rhythm and timing in everyday life. Whether observing craftsmen or ordinary people, he noticed that success often depended on knowing when to act, when to wait, and how to maintain the right pace throughout the process. Musashi understood that if you pay close enough attention, the world itself becomes your sensei. So if you want to learn how to write, don't just read a book, type out a chapter of a novel you admire, word for word, to physically feel the author's pacing and sentence structure. If you want to learn to play jazz, start copying the solos of your favourite performers and learn to play them note for note. If you want to learn graphic design, don't just collect inspiration, recreate designs you admire and figure out why elements are placed where they are, how space is used, and what makes the layout work. The goal isn't to copy someone's work, it's to understand the decisions behind it. Learning requires active observation, and the materials are already sitting right in front of you. Look at the world around you and the people who are already doing the work. Watch their process. Pick one piece of exceptional work, take it apart until you understand the mechanics, and use those same mechanics to build your own. You just need to pick one thing, pay close attention, and start. Number 2. Discard the ascetic. Musashi's most famous duel took place on Ganryu Island against a legendary swordsman named Sasaki Kojiro. In many ways, Kojiro was the exact opposite of Musashi. He was wealthy, impeccably dressed, and he carried a master-crafted, oversized sword known as the drying pole. It was a devastating weapon with exceptional reach. When Musashi arrived at the island, he looked nothing like his opponent. He was unwashed, wore no formal armour, and carried no finely crafted sword. During the boat ride, however, he'd been thinking about the fight. Kojiro's greatest advantage was the length of his sword. Stepping into that range with a standard weapon was a death sentence. Musashi needed a way to bridge the distance. Looking around the boat, he found a spare wooden oar. He took out his knife and whittled the heavy wood into a crude makeshift sword. He didn't make it look intimidating. He carved it for a single mathematical purpose: to be exactly a few inches longer than Kojiro's steel blade. So when Musashi stepped onto the sand, Kojiro drew his masterpiece. Musashi raised his piece of driftwood. Kojiro swung first, the long steel blade slicing through Musashi's headband, narrowly missing his skull. In that exact fraction of a second, Musashi brought the heavy wooden oar down on Kojiro's head. The master swordsman collapsed. The duel was over in a single strike. Musashi operated under a blunt philosophy. Do nothing which is of no use. He didn't care about appearances or status. He didn't rely on a famous or expensive sword, and he didn't try to present himself as a traditional samurai. He focused on what would work for him in that situation. And for him, the key factors were distance, timing, and control. He chose a wooden weapon because it gave him the reach he needed for the fight. The material didn't matter as much as whether or not it solved the practical problem in front of him. Today, we tell ourselves that we can't film a video without some cinema-grade camera, and that you can't start a business without a fancy custom-designed website. You can't get into shape without a premium gym membership. We confuse looking like a professional with actually doing the work. You need to focus on what you already have instead of worrying about having the perfect setup. Look at the equipment you already own and push it to its absolute physical limit. If you want to shoot a video, use the phone in your pocket, prop it up on a stack of books, and use a cheap desk lamp for lighting. If you want to learn to code, don't wait until you can afford a high-end graphics card and double monitor setup. Type the lines on a 5-year-old laptop using a free text editor. A basic tool used correctly will always beat expensive gear in the hands of an amateur. Number 3. Pick your sword. A traditional samurai was expected to be a well-rounded warrior. They were supposed to divide their training between archery, horseback riding, spearfishing, and swordsmanship. But Musashi completely ignored the bow and the horse. He understood that if he tried to learn several weapons all at the same time, his progress in each one would be slower. He picked up his sword and swung it thousands of times a day. He built a singular, lethal competence with one tool before he ever gave his attention to anything else. The takeaway is simple. Pick one skill, give it your full attention, and build a strong foundation around it before you do anything else. For example, if you're starting a YouTube channel, your one thing isn't learning 5 different marketing strategies, mastering complex motion graphics, and launching merchandise all at once. It's mastering the art of storytelling. If you're an entrepreneur, it's finding that one specific product or service you can deliver better than anyone else. Identify what your sword is going to be. Choose the one skill that matters most and work on it consistently and get good at it. Once that foundation is in place, you can expand into all those other areas. Number 4. Kill all distractions. In his final text, the Dokkodo, Musashi wrote 21 strict ways of living a disciplined life. Two of the most intense rules were, do not seek pleasure for its own sake, and do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. Now, Musashi wasn't a monk. He travelled through major cities, and legends suggest he had his share of romantic encounters, but the difference was that he never let those desires become a leash. He never let lust get in the way of his ultimate path. There's a famous legend where rival clans sent a beautiful woman to seduce Musashi, hoping to assassinate him in a moment of weakness. But Musashi's mind was an absolute fortress. He sensed the trap, saw right through the seduction, and neutralized the threat. He survived because he refused to let the temporary high of a romantic encounter override his sense of survival. It was for this exact same reason that he rarely even bathed. In his era, removing your swords left you completely vulnerable to a surprise attack. To Musashi, any attachment to comfort, romance, or superficial pleasure would distract him from his ultimate goal, and ultimately get him killed. Today, you're not really worried about rival swordsmen, but you're fighting for your own attention. When you sit down to learn something new, whether it's a complex philosophy, a new language, or a difficult skill, willpower isn't enough to win that fight. You have to physically alter your environment to force your brain into a state of deep absorption. A great place to start is with your phone. Put it in another room entirely. If the device is sitting in your line of sight, a fraction of your brain is always burning energy deciding not to pick it up. So remove the choice. Next, try working in strict time blocks. Set a timer for 90 minutes. If you get stuck on a problem and start feeling frustrated, you sit there and look at the screen until you figure it out. You don't reach for a quick distraction to escape the boredom or the tension. Finally, clear your workspace. If you're typing, you only need a keyboard. If you're sketching, you only need a pen. Put everything else in the drawer. When you strip away every alternative, your focus has nowhere else to go. Take away the options, and the work becomes the only thing left in the room. Number 5. The 1000-Day Grind. In the Book of Five Rings, Musashi writes a line that reveals his ultimate secret to mastery. Step by step, walk the 1,000-mile road. 1,000 days of training to develop, 10,000 days of training to polish. Think about what that actually means for a moment. 10,000 days is nearly 30 years. 30 years of waking up and doing the exact same fundamental movements over and over and over again. Towards the end of his life, after surviving over 60 lethal duels and becoming the most famous undefeated swordsman in Japanese history, Musashi could have easily retired to a wealthy, comfortable estate. He could have rested on his reputation. Instead, he retreated into the freezing Raigando, the spirit rock cave. He spent his final months entirely alone in the dark, meditating, practicing his strikes and crystallizing his life's work into writing before he died. Even as one of the greatest swordsmen of his era, he kept doing the same basic work that had built his skill. Getting good at something requires doing the fundamental things for a very long time, mostly when it's boring and no one's watching. There's no shortcut around the repetitions. If you want to learn piano, it means practicing the same scales, chords, and exercises repeatedly until you can play them without mistakes and without thinking. It means spending time on the basics even when you'd rather be playing advanced songs. If you want to become a writer, it means sitting down and writing consistently, even when the ideas aren't flowing and the motivation isn't there. Your sheer capacity to endure the relentless repetition of the basics is how you eventually achieve greatness. Number 6. Break the rules of the curriculum. Musashi once went up against the powerful Yoshioka sword school at a place called Ichijoji. After Musashi defeated the school's senior members in previous matches, the remaining Yoshioka retainers arranged a final confrontation. It wasn't intended to be a fair fight, It was intended to be an ambush by a large, heavily armed group. Now, traditional samurai etiquette and the formal curriculum of the time dictated very specific rules for combat. You were supposed to fight honourably, draw a single, long sword, and face your opponents one-on-one. But Musashi looked at the terrifying reality in front of him and realised that following the traditional rules of honour would absolutely have gotten him killed. So he completely abandoned the proper way to fight, and instead of walking into their trap, he preemptively ambushed them, instantly striking down the school's leader. Then, as the dozens of angry men swarmed him, he did something completely unthinkable in formal samurai culture. He drew both his longsword, his katana, and his short sword, the wakizashi, at the exact same time. Fighting with a blade in each hand, moving wildly but efficiently, he hacked his way out of the ambush and survived. This wasn't a technique he learned in a classroom. It was raw, survival-driven improvisation. And it didn't just save his life that day, it actually gave birth to his famous Niten Ichi Ryu, or two heavens as one sword style. But sword fighting aside, whether you're building a business, writing a book, or learning a new skill, when an established method doesn't solve the problem in front of you, you have to adapt. Think about learning a new language. The traditional school curriculum makes you memorize grammar tables and conjugate verbs on paper for 3 years. And at the end of it, most people still can't order a coffee. But if you're suddenly dropped into a foreign country and need to navigate a train station, you discard the grammar book, you learn the 50 most common words, use your hands and speak broken, embarrassing sentences until you're finally understood. You optimize entirely for the end result, which is of course communication, instead of trying to pass some formal written test. So whenever you feel stuck in life, ask yourself, am I failing because the problem's too hard? Or am I failing because I'm playing by someone else's polite rules? If the traditional way is going to make you fail and fighting with two swords is the only way to win, then draw both swords. Number 7. Paint with the sword. We usually treat skills like they live in separate boxes. We put business over here, art over there, and physical fitness somewhere else. We assume that if we want to learn something new, we have to start completely from scratch. But true mastery doesn't work like that. Once you reach the top of one mountain, you'll realize it's connected to all the others. After surviving his brutal dueling years, Musashi didn't just open a dojo and teach swordsmanship. He became a town planner, an architect, and a master of sumi-e, traditional Japanese ink painting. Today, his surviving paintings are literally considered national treasures in Japan. When he picked up a brush, he didn't start from zero. He took the exact principles he used in combat: timing, spacing, decisive action, and absolute focus, and he just applied them to the canvas instead. To him, the deliberate stroke of an ink brush was exactly the same as a sword strike. The tool changed, but the internal mechanics were identical. The principles of mastery always transfer. Think about learning martial arts. On the surface, you're just learning how to throw a punch or survive an attack. But internally, you're actually learning distance, timing, and energy conservation, and how to stay calm while someone's trying to hurt you. Now apply the same idea to a high-stakes negotiation or a tense argument. An inexperienced person talks too much, gives away information they don't need to, and offers multiple rushed compromises in an attempt to get an agreement. But someone who's mastered the mechanics of a fight does the exact opposite. They stay perfectly calm, they let the other person talk and overextend their position, and then they deliver one clear, well-timed point that completely shifts the negotiation. The rhythm is exactly the same. You're just using words instead of physical strikes. Identify one area where you already excel, whether that's analysing data, closing a sale, or sticking to a diet. Deconstruct why you're good at it. It's not just talent, it's repetition, attention to detail, and emotional control. When you decide to learn a new skill, bring those proven systems with you. Treat your current expertise as your sword, and use those exact same mechanics to master your next painting. you already have everything you need. And that's our video. So what did you think? Has Musashi's teachings inspired you to learn a new skill, or go back to something you thought you'd never achieve? Maybe you prefer life when it isn't all a skill tree. Whatever your thoughts, let's get into it in the comments. But until next time, as always, I've been Dan, you've been awesome, and if you enjoyed what you saw or found it helpful at all, why not check out our full Philosophies for Life playlist? And for more videos to help you find success and happiness using beautiful philosophical wisdom, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.